Okay, welcome back to the Mercedes build. As you can see, the body's upside, well, not the body, the chassis is upside down. The body is over there, waiting to go back on. I had to flip it upside down to finish the exhaust. I put the mufflers on here, and I put the pipe hangers on. Those are for model motor cars. Those are brass or copper, probably brass. We'll say the brass. And they got screwed onto the rear frame member there. Just to recap things that were covered a long time ago that you might not remember or know. Let me get a light on here. The cross members, that one right there that goes along that the rear diff mounts to, I remade that out of aluminum. The original parts are plastic and they were bent. If they're bent, then the whole car is going to sag down. So that one I remade out of aluminum. That was in a much previous video. The one back there, I don't think we can see it, but that one back there is also aluminum, and the most aft one right there that the hangers are on is also aluminum. So that'll strengthen up the back of the car a lot better. Also, you'll notice there's a fiber lock nut right down there. Fiber lock nut there, and fiber lock nut right there. Those are what mount the chassis to the plastic tub. I guess we could call that a tub. The interior floor. The original mounting was supposed to be one of those cheap little stupid pocher screws like that with machine threads on it. And there's no way I would trust that to hold those parts together, because here's the thing. That plastic floor gets screwed to the chassis, and then the body gets screwed to the plastic floor with those stupid little tiny pocher screws. And if those threads fell or those screws break, which they can, then the whole thing is going to be loose and floppy. And I wouldn't trust that, even if I was just going to finish this and put it on my own shelf and never touch again, let alone, keep in mind, I have to box this up and ship it halfway across the country. I don't want to take any chance of anything there coming loose. So I originally replaced the pocher screws with these screws, and I've shown you these before. I bought a pack of these. I bought a pack of those screws. They're 2mm or 2.5. I already forgot. In various lengths, and they are, I believe, much stronger than the pocher screws. Plus, they have. Where's my focus? Sorry, getting out of view here. But they have a much coarser thread. It's more of a wood screw instead of a machine screw. But they bite into the plastic a lot more. But I got to thinking about those. I still don't trust those. So I took those out and I drilled that hole all the way through. And then I put in a 440 machine screw with a fiber lock nut. And that is behind, or will be behind, either behind or under. Let me flip this over real quick here. There, right there. There's one. There's the other one, right there. So those are either under or behind the rear seat. So you're never going to see them. And I think what I'm going to do is when I put the body back on, I'll do the same thing, is replace the screws with 440 screws and nuts, fiber lock nuts, to really hold everything on tight. All right, just getting a look at the bottom, because it's been a while since we've seen any of this, and hopefully this will be the last time I have it upside down. Actually, it's got to be upside down again later. We'll get to that in a minute. But starting in the front, we have the model motor cars steering linkage, which is a really nice upgrade from the kit parts. You'll notice I have a little bit of grime on the oil pan and the transmission and the rear diff, and I got a little bit of rust on the exhaust. My philosophy here is I want this to look like the guy who owns it drives it, but yet takes care of it. And the thing is, have you ever looked at the bottom of a car? If you look at the bottom of a real car, it's just a mess of black, gray, rust, grease, oil splotchiness all over. It's pretty much just all one splotchy shade of grime. And I could do that. And actually, I read somewhere that the real car, everything on the bottom just got painted flat black. Like everything, just flat black. I could do that and it would be really realistic, but it just wouldn't look nice as a model. There's a fine line between what is realistic versus what looks realistic. And a lot of people will pose this kind of up on blocks with a mirror underneath so you can like see all the details of the bottom. And if you just painted it flat black, that would be very boring to look at. So I tried to compromise between looking realistic versus looking nice. I hope you think this looks nice. Well, I hope the guy I'm building this for thinks it looks nice. I think it looks good, but my opinion doesn't matter. The opinion of the guy who I'm building this for matters. So hopefully you like what I've done here. I try not to go overboard with weathering and rust and grime. If this is what a real car looked like, that would be pristine on a real car. So I just tried to do a little bit so it didn't look, I didn't want it to look like a toy. I didn't want it to look like it rolled off the showroom floor. So anyways, that's my whole thought process behind that. I do need to repair my exhaust pipes. When I was fitting the exhaust pipes in here, the hangers kind of scratched them up a little bit. So I'm going to have to clean that up and polish that up. And plus, I don't know how long to put it in. They could be sticking out that far, or they could be sticking out that far. And I don't know, and I won't know until I put the body back on. And I have to look at photos and see how far they stick out on the real car. Plus, the guy I'm building this for also got these. So I'm going to have to paint those metal-ish colors. I got to figure out what color to paint those. And those go on the end of the exhaust pipe there. So again, I got to look at reference photos to see how far those are from the back of the car. That kind of rhymed. So yeah, and I won't know that till the body's back on. So I'm going to have to either install those and secure them with the car right side up, or figure out a way to support it upside down without crunching anything here. So anyways, right now what I'm going to do is, I got to think about it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure what I need to do now is flip that back right side up and mount the body to the chassis permanently for the last time, for good and forever. But I think, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I need to mount the dashboard in the body first. I think it would be easier to put that in first. I got to think about it. So let me get something done, and then I'll catch you up and show you what I did. And I got the dash installed. And because I'm a horrible YouTuber, I did not record attaching the wires to the switch parts on the back side. But here's some photos I took of it with some explanations on some stuff that are kind of important. One thing to notice here is you notice that spot in the middle where I have removed the chrome plating. The one that I did several years ago, that area was not chrome plated, and you need to remove the chrome plating because the chrome plating is electrically conductive, and if you leave that on there, then it basically makes your circuit complete the whole, the entire time, even without the key installed. And I actually put it together not thinking about it, but then I checked continuity of the wires and I had about 300 ohms. So that would have been enough to drain the battery and maybe even possibly cause the lights to be on even with the key not in. So if yours still has a chrome plating, you got to make sure you remove that chrome plating or it's going to cause problems. And here you can see the wires installed with the little switch tab and a nut over the housing that the key goes in. And actually the key is in and on right now. So the key actually contacts that little tab. So you're going to have to bend the tab down and shape it to where when you put the key in and turn it, it contacts that tab, which connects the two wires and completes your circuit. Here's just a closer view of the key installed. And again, the key is on and turned, so the key part's vertical. And then that touches that little tab above it, completing the circuit. And here's a view with the key turned off. Notice the gap between the key and the little tab. And just another angle with better lighting and the key off. And then there it is again with the key turned on, touching that tab. And you'll also notice that I've got that top frame piece here taped in place because I had to bust off that side post and reattach it. You remember several videos ago where I made this fixture to slide into the B-pillars and then hold those posts in place? And I spent a lot of time making this piece of crap, and I thought it was genius. Well, come to find out, this was a horrible idea, and it is junk. Because when I went to put that post just kind of test fit in place, it was all crooked and did not line up with the posts at all. And come to find out, that post was further aft than that post by about 3 millimeters. Maybe 2. Yeah, 2, we'll say. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was enough to where that would set on crooked. And at first I'm thinking, well, it's not that noticeable because honestly, I never noticed until I went to just set that piece on top. And I'm like, well, if I go ahead and attach that to the fabric and just kind of rest it on even, you wouldn't notice. The window would be further back here than there, but depending on the angle, you probably wouldn't even notice. But then I started test fitting the doors in place. And when I would put this door on, I had a nice even gap between that windshield post and the door window itself. And when I put this door on, they overlapped a little bit. And I just couldn't live with that. So I went onto the back side underneath and I ground off the CA that was kind of holding that in. Because if you remember, this piece, these side pieces, have a little post that kind of goes into, you got to drill a hole into the body, and threaded rod goes in. Of course, it's chrome plated, so you'll never get a nut on it. And then you just CA it from the back side. There's a little bit of CA under it, holding it down. But there's not a lot of gluing surface area, so 80% of the hold is from the CA on the back side. So I ground that down as best as I could, and then just started wiggling that till it kind of broke free and just kind of carefully worked it out. I was very afraid I was going to damage the paint. Luckily, I did not. And so then I could put this on, and what I had to do, you can see where that center post comes out here, and it just missed that hole. So instead of breaking this one off and doing both, I drilled a new hole back. It's only about 1 millimeter back, visibly not even noticeable. I'll trim that edge back just a tiny bit, but I'll get back to that here in a second. And re-drilled the hole here. And so now what I can do is put that piece on with the temporary windshield panels, tape it all down, and that holds that exactly where it needs to be. That's what I should have done in the first place, instead of that stupid frame. I don't know why I didn't even think of that. I feel kind of stupid not even thinking about using this piece as a fixture to hold all 3 pieces in alignment. So if you're using these kits or these parts for model motor cars, I highly recommend not to take my advice from a previous video and just use this piece here as the fixture to hold it all in place. Now you still have to be careful that it's not twisted one way or the other, but that's pretty easy to just kind of get them lined up. Now back to this being off a little bit. Part of me was thinking maybe I should have broken both pieces off and put it right in that center hole where it should be. However, one thing that has always bugged me about this model from the first one I did years ago was there's a huge gap between that frame, or that post, I guess the A-pillar you'd call it, that windshield post, the gap between that and the edge of the window here. It was a huge gap, which to me just never looked right. So now that that's back a little bit, it made that gap look a little bit better. So that was actually, I guess, a happy mistake, I guess. So I just made this one the same as that one. Um, the glue is now set. It's now cured. It's been setting like this overnight, so I can now take this off. And at some point, I can start attaching this to the fabric. Now, something else I did. I was getting really concerned with the edge of this fabric fraying, for one thing, and being a little bit too short. Now it's all wrinkled back here. That'll get pulled further that way. That's why it's not even close, but it'll pull more. Trying to do it one-handed, yeah. So it'll pull more. It's just I had it folded back earlier, so it'll go that way more a little bit. But anyways, I was concerned about that edge fraying more and then losing length, and also not having enough to really roll around that plastic piece. So I spray glued on an extension, and I know that edge looks really ugly, but I'm really hoping that edge gets rolled around the front of that plastic piece so it'll never be seen. So that edge will never be seen, but I needed just a little bit extra to give me something to hold on to and play with while I'm pulling it and rolling it around that edge, and to keep that from fraying anymore. So again, just keep in mind, while you're looking at this now, that ugly frayed edge, hopefully, the plan is, I'm really hoping, will not be seen. All right, so don't worry about that. Don't worry about how that looks. That'll be completely gone and never seen again. So I believe right now I am ready to attach this onto that. Remember, I put those on with some 440 screws and fiber lock nuts. I also drilled out here and here for some more of those 440 screws and fiber lock nuts to attach the body. And again, those will not be seen. When this is all done, those will be completely hidden and never seen. But I trust those way more than I trust the tiny little screws that the kit uses, and even more than the screws I was using. So just to show you, that's the size of screw the kit calls for, maybe a little longer, but that's the size of the screw. That's the size I was using. That's the size I'm using now. And even when I went from that to that, I actually broke one of those trying to screw it into the plastic. And yes, I drilled it out a little bit, obviously not enough. But by using those, this thing will never break and fall apart, hopefully. And keep in mind, I'm boxing this and shipping it halfway across the country. So I definitely don't trust those to hold up. And manhandling this thing and pulling it out of the box, I mean, who knows where you're going to lift it from. But yeah, use those. That'll hold it all together. So like I said, let me put the camera down. Let me get the body mounted onto the chassis for the last time, hopefully permanently for good. And I'll get back to you here in just a little bit. Okay, the body is on, and I'm really hoping permanently for good, forever. I can't think of any other reason why it's going to have to come off. So now I'm really anxious to get started making the seats and covering these resin seats with the leather. He did buy the Model Motor Cars resin seats, so no springs or anything. Just cover those in leather. So I'm really looking forward to starting that and see how that goes. Should be easy enough, I hope. Of course, I got the seat bases. These need to be painted black. But before I do the seats, I really should finish the convertible top. And that includes gluing the fabric to this. And also, the way the kit has you do it, there's a second one of these plastic pieces that gets screwed onto this one. Well, that leaves these big screw heads on the bottom, which I don't think look nice. So I'm going to do the same thing I did on the other one that I did a few years ago, is I'm going to make a piece out of aluminum that will be used to go on the bottom of this, So the fabric wraps around this, then the aluminum piece on the bottom, and I think that looks a lot nicer, looks a little bit more realistic. But before we get to that, something I want to mention here. You'll notice the big screw head here and here. Something that I noticed way early on when I first got this kit was that the floor pan had a really bad curve this way. And it was very obvious. More than likely it was brand new like that. I don't know if maybe the plastic kind of warped when it came out of the mold, and who knows. Maybe it was just packed in the box weird and it just put a curve into it. So when I was working on the chassis and other stuff, I had this taped. I took some tape from the back edge all the way to the front edge with a block in the middle to try to push it this way, to try to get that bow out of it and make it flat. I even tried, while it was taped like that, putting a heat gun on the bottom along here, but you really have to be careful with trying to move plastic with heat, because there's a really fine line between the perfect amount of heat that does what you need it to do versus too little heat to where it won't do anything at all, and then too much heat where it's just going to completely melt it and destroy it. And I was being a little bit conservative with the heat gun, so when I took the tape off, it sprung back to that big hump in the middle. Now it was easy enough to push down, and what it looks like to me is from this part forward is flat. And it looks like to me that the intended purpose of this, or the intended function of this, was for that part here to set flat on the chassis. Now from here up, we've got a bump where the seat sets, so there's a gap between here and the chassis. But I think that was supposed to set flat on the chassis, and it was not. It was off by maybe 1/4 of an inch or so. Now I could push it down pretty easily, but it would just spring right back up again. And I noticed that when I pushed it down, the gap where the stick shift comes out got better. When it was just kind of spring-loaded up, it was actually touching against that. So now I've got an even gap all the way around there. It also fit the rudder pedals better, and it fit the body better. So what I did was I put some CA between the frame and the part of the floor here and here, and then I clamped it, and then I drilled through and put a screw here and here to hold it down. And I put the screws here and not here because, well, the seat goes here and you'll never see that screw again. So this is a way that I came up with to get that to set flat, and so it fits better and it is secured better. It's not going anywhere, and you'll never see it. So whether it was right or wrong to do that, I don't know, but in my mind it was the right thing to do. And I also got the bolts in here on each side. That also secures the body into the floor area. And also those screws that go in there, they didn't fit very well until I pushed that down, because when that was sprung up, it actually moved the hole on the back side a little bit. So doing that helped that line up. It just makes everything fit better. So again, we got a big ugly screw head here. I suppose I could have picked a nicer looking screw, but I wanted something that would grip and hold. And as I said, once the seats are in, those will be completely hidden. You'll never see it. So again, as we said before, I've got the, can't see it, but the 440 screws, fiber lock nuts up under there. Everything is very nicely secured, screwed, bolted down, and nothing's ever going to move again, hopefully. So, like I said, let me get this. I'm still very concerned. I don't have enough fabric, but so I've been procrastinating. I've been putting it off because I'm afraid of what it's going to look like, but I got to do it sooner than later. So let me get that together, and let me get the aluminum piece made, and then we'll take a look at the pieces, and then we'll see what it looks like when it's all clamped together. Okay, well, it's the next morning since yesterday, and I got to be honest with you. I'm very disappointed in you guys, because I was going on about how I was going to put the body on for good and never take it off again. And not a single one of you pointed out the fact that I forgot to put the threaded stud in there. So if you look at the instructions right there, there's supposed to be a threaded stud that goes into that hole. That's what holds your spare wheels on. And there's a nut on the inside that threads into. So what you're supposed to do is put the nut on the threaded rod and feed it from the back side up through, and then put the nut on the top. Well, how am I going to do that now? I got an idea. I'm going to take some string and put it in there till it comes out. Glue the end of the string to the threaded rod and then pull it up and then put the nut on top. So let me put the camera down, and I'll get to that later. If my little string trick doesn't work, I just take the body back off. It's not really that big a deal, just pain in the neck. So anyways, let me get the camera down and we'll talk about what's happening here, because it's not ideal. Okay, first off, I made this aluminum piece, and that basically just follows the contour of the front plastic piece, and I drilled the 3 holes in it. And you'll notice, might be kind of hard to see, but this has a downward bend to it this way. You've got to do that, because if you don't, when you put it on the posts, it'll be leaning down. So if you want that surface kind of flat, that has to be bent a little bit. Again, if you don't bend it, it'll be setting more this way. So anyways, that goes on like that, right on those posts, like that. And so the idea was to glue, and you'll notice I've got that edge rolled around the plastic piece. I'll show you that edge here in a second, but that gets glued onto that. Now, I was realizing that I'm going to run out, or I'm not going to have enough room, so I basically just put it on as close as I could get, and look how much, that's all I could get. I was really hoping for, you know, about a 1/4 inch down here, but that is all I could afford to roll around there. And it just barely makes it. If I pull, it'll just barely make it. Yeah, I want to say I got lucky by having just enough to roll around, but at the same time, yeah, that kind of sucks. It'll work, but just barely. Now that edge right there is a little bit ugly, but again, this piece goes on like that, and that gives it a much nicer, cleaner look, and a little bit more professional, I think. Now, a couple of other things I did was the holes here. I moved those forward a little bit, and that allows this whole thing to shift back a little bit, which helps with the length. If I had put the hole right in the middle where it belongs, then the whole thing would have been forward, it would have been tighter, yeah. So I moved the holes. Now, this edge right here is a little bit tall. If we put that on, I don't know if you can see it in the camera very well, but it is sticking up a little bit, which is good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a piece of aluminum the same thickness as this and to the same shape, and I'm going to clamp in here, and I'm going to roll that edge around the top of that. So however tall it is will get folded back. That'll leave kind of like a cupped edge for that other piece to slip into. And that should work. That'll help cover the edge there. It'll look nicer. It'll look more finished. I think a little bit more professional. But that's where this is. So I just wanted to show you those pieces before I bonded it on and where it is. So again, for any of you who are doing this kit, I highly recommend that you just buy some extra fabric and cut out all new pieces and go from there. Make it like 1 inch longer than the kit piece on each end, of the front end and the back end. And so you have plenty to play with and you don't have to have the same problems I'm having. It'll work. I'll get it to work. It's just, you know, not as nice as I was hoping for. Now, one other thing, when I put this on, I first held it on with a tiny strip, or a thin strip, maybe about that wide, of double-sided tape. This stuff right here, I've had this roll for probably 100 years. this 3M double-sided tape. That way I could just stick the frame to it and then take my time with a little tool and some CA. Try to get that in view better. Right on the edge and then just roll it over. And the reason why I did not glue the entire surface down here is because if you're not careful with the glue, it can soak through and stain the fabric, and I really didn't want to do that. So, and also, that leaves me with a little bit of a gap under here. If you notice, I can stick something in there like that. I did that so that when I make the internal structure, that internal structure will have a little lip that goes in there, and that's what's going to kind of pull that tight and hold it into position. At least that's the plan. Whether it does that or not, I mean, that's my plan. So it'll work, I hope. Yeah, man, that's tight. That's going to be close. I'm still nervous about it, but I can't really do anything else about it at this point. So let me just get this finalized, and it's kind of one of those things where I won't know exactly how it is until I build the internal part that's designed to hold it in place. And we'll just have to keep going. At this point, if it's a complete failure and doesn't work, the only real option is to tear all that off and redo it, which I don't want to do. But let me get some more done, and we'll get back to you here in a second. Okay, so I really wanted to have a completed, finished top at the end of this video, but I ran into an issue. This video has already been way too long, so I'm going to have one more part. That second part is going to be the internal structure holding this in place. And but before I end this one, let me just show you what's happening now. Let me show you the bad decision I made, and some mistakes were made. I had to make a minor little fix. So let's just talk about that and how that could have been avoided. First off, as we've said, the fabric that Pocher cut for us, in my opinion, was cut way too short. With the body off of the chassis, pulling it forward as far as I could comfortably pull forward without fear of it popping out from the under the clamp here. Maybe I could have gotten a little bit more. I don't know. But I really didn't feel comfortable pulling anymore because, again, I did not want it to start coming loose out of the back side and around here. So I went forward as far as I could. And with the body off of the chassis, it overhung about 1/4 inch, give or take a little bit, which I thought would be enough. Now I knew that when I put the body on the chassis, it would spring it down, because again, the body kind of springs up this way. So when you attach the body, it springs down, which I knew would open up the top here, so I would lose some of that distance. But I thought I would still be good. And when I put the body on the chassis and it pulled it back, it was just barely there. And so I had just barely enough. This is the bottom piece I'm not using because that's where the screws go. But pretend this is the top piece. I had just barely enough fabric to go over that edge, just to go around that edge. And as you've seen, the front edge was frayed, and I've tried a few different things to keep it from fraying worse. Hairspray, taping it, whatever. And I think all of that did help, but it still did fray back a little bit. And so I glued it on the front edge, and I had just a tiny few little strands on the bottom that got glued. But after I got it all connected or all glued on, I then made this aluminum piece, and I think I showed that earlier, and I polished that edge. That makes it look much more realistic. When you look at photos of the real car, that makes it look much more realistic. And I got that bonded on. And after that, I noticed that a couple of spots, the frayed edge had thinned down enough to where it looked like a tiny little bald spot here, and there's one here. And you could actually see some of the black plastic through the fabric, just because of the way the frayed edge started working back. So there's a dark spot here and a dark spot here. And I don't know how many people would have noticed that. I definitely noticed it, and it was bothering me and it bugged me. And when I saw that, I'm thinking, crap, what the heck am I going to do with this? Um, so I kind of just put it away and slept on it for a night. And then I had the idea of, what if I masked off a thin little strip and then laid down a bead of epoxy to simulate like a weather strip seal or something like that. And I'm thinking, I could use black epoxy to look like a rubber weather strip seal, but I thought that would look too harsh. So I went to Home Depot and I found some different epoxies. I found a gray epoxy, which I thought might look good, a continuation from the chrome. But then I found tan epoxy. And I'm like, well, that would be perfect. That's like a perfect match. And it's like, I knew I was onto something. I had a scrap piece of fabric lying around here somewhere. I don't know where that went, but I had a scrap piece of fabric that I masked off a stripe, and I put some of this tan epoxy on, and it looked good. And I'm like, here's a bit of it that's been dried. And I'm like, yes, that's it. I knew for a fact I had my solution. I had the perfect answer. So I masked off that edge. I put a bead of this tan epoxy on it and let it cure. And I peeled off the masking tape. And that's when I realized I made a huge mistake. And still part of me thought it looked kind of like what I was going after. Part of me knew it looked like bad. And trying to remember this is a family show. Don't want to use like bad words. But I kind of convinced myself I was on the fence. Like, part of me thought it looked okay. Part of me thought it looked horrible. So then I had another idea of taking some scrap fabric and making a little strip to cover that. And I sent some photos of the screw up and that fabric trim piece. I sent some photos to the customer. We discussed it. I offered remaking from scratch. I told him, I said, look, if you think I completely screwed this up, let me know, and I can restart from scratch. I honestly don't want to do that. But I would if that's what it takes. And that might still be on the table. I'll explain it here in a second. He replied back and said that he thought the epoxied edge looked like I used too much glue and it soaked through, and I agreed. I definitely think that's what it looks like. And he was okay with the fabric trim. So here's what the fabric trim looks like. So again, I cut a strip and I folded it in half and glued it. So this edge here is a nice folded edge. So it's a nice clean folded edge. The forward edge is butted up against the aluminum. And so now we have a nice clean edge along there. I think that looks okay. It's not 100% completely realistic to the real car, but I don't think it looks horrible. So it definitely looks better than the epoxied edge I did, and it looks a little bit better than the frayedness showing through. Again, it's not exactly perfect the way a real car looks. This is the metal edges. But I don't really think anybody would actually notice that. I hope. I don't know. I'm not 100% pleased with how this came out, but I think right now it's the best option. Now, right now, if I just gently pull, you'll notice it doesn't meet the windshield. If I pull a little bit more, it does meet the windshield. So I've got to pull it quite a bit to get it to meet the windshield. Now, I've already said many times I need to make an internal structure to hold it in place. Well, now that internal structure is going to have to push it forward. I experimented with just a simple piece of plastic like this. First one is too short, so I had to lengthen it. And that basically just sets in the back and like that, and it would push the top of that forward. This kind of works. It does push it forward enough, but it wants to lift up off of the windshield because that is pushing down low, and the spring loaded of the plastic is pushing up on it. So it's pushing up. I never intended to use just a simple plastic piece like this. So this was just an experiment to see if I could get enough forward pressure pushing it forward. So this is not what I had in mind for internal structure. This, again, was just kind of a preliminary test. My plan for the internal structure is for it to clip in. There's an open space here and here. So it would clip in here, follow the curve up, and then follow the curve around the doors, and that would give something for the side of the fabric to rest against. And then come all the way up and allow this to then rest on top of those posts there. That form I've decided is going to be fiberglass. I'm going to make a wooden form of the right shape and then lay fiberglass on top of that to make like a fiberglass shell. So basically, you'll stick a fiberglass shell into here and then flip this. And you'll notice I did not glue the fabric to that plastic frame. You'll notice you can slip it between the frame and the plastic, or the fabric and the frame there. You can slip that up in there between there. And that's what's going to kind of push that forward. So the making of that fiberglass shell is going to be its own little project. And so that's going to be its own video. So this video is going to end here. So now remember I said remaking this from scratch is still on the table, even though the customer said he would hate to have me have to do that because he understands that that would be kind of not fun for me. However, if the internal structure is incapable of putting that in place, then the only option is to redo this from scratch. The biggest pain in the butt with that is the fact that the kit cut pieces are too short. The biggest struggle, the biggest frustration, the biggest stress is trying to fit this perfectly so it matches the windshield. If I started over from scratch, I would cut the pieces like 2 inches longer than they need to be. That would get rid of all of that stress. And the only real pain then would be stitching that. But stitching it is actually easy. It's just very time consuming and not fun, but it is easy. Of this entire top, actually stitching that, in my opinion, was one of the easiest things to do. It was just the most tedious and time-consuming thing to do. So if I do have to restart and remake this, that would suck, but it is what it is. I want it to be right. If my internal structure does not put that down where it needs to be, then I think that's going to be the only real option from there. So anyways, I'm going to stop rambling now. I'll end this video, and next video will be all about making the internal structure so that it can be displayed with the top down. So until then, as always, thanks for watching.